Hello and welcome back to another Dare to Game video. Today we're playing Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and we're going to be going over the double-bladed lightsaber stance guide. And so this is my guide for if you like using the double-bladed lightsaber or the saber staff, depending on what you call it. If that's your primary stance, then this guide is for you. I'm going to go over strengths, weaknesses, perks to use with it, skills, really just kind of what they do, not really which ones to choose, since I'm an advocate for all, and playstyle, all that sort of stuff. So let's just dive on in and get to it. So some quick things to know about this stance. This one is the second one that you will unlock, so you'll have it for the majority of the game. You get it quite early on Coruscant. If you've played through, you'll remember it's in a room with a bunch of hanging cables where there's a bunch of enemies around. You're introduced to this lightsaber style, and it makes sense why, and we'll get to that. Because this lightsaber stance is the single best stance against larger groups of enemies. It deals a lot of damage very quickly. Now, mind you, the per damage swing for the double-bladed stance is actually one of, if not the lowest, out of all of the stances in the game, which is a little bit annoying. But you obviously deal them extremely fast, and as well as the person that you're aiming at, person or thing that you're aiming at, which you will deal a lot of damage to, you also have the other side of it constantly swinging around you, which is good at breaking the attacks of other enemies to your side and behind you that might be trying to attack you. So it's a very aggressive stance that works well against larger numbers. I would say 3 or more is where it really excels. That being said, because of that being its specific strength, it is actually weaker against single opponents. Now, it's not useless against them. I've used it quite a bit, and I've had great success against single opponents, but it does quite a bit lower damage per hit, and so as a dueling stance, it's not nearly as good as it is a crowd control stance. So strengths are crowd control and multiple opponents, 3 or more I would say, and weaknesses, again, primarily just that single focused, especially larger enemies like big beasts and bosses. So that's kind of the overall rough overview for this one. The modeling for it is based off of Darth Maul from the Phantom Menace, so if you look at the movements that your character makes while going through the motions, that's where we get most of them from. It can be used lots of different ways, but that is the style that you're going to have. Because of that, I think it works probably the best with the Sith style playthrough. So if you want your Cal Kestis to be sort of a darker character and to have a more aggressive and all-out form that relies heavily on the dark side, I would say, because it's a very emotional and aggressive form, then this is the stance that works really well for that playstyle. As far as skills for the double-bladed form, there are 8 different ones, and so I don't recommend any of these over other ones. I think if you're going to specialize in the form, you should get them all, because they do help it become a lot more effective. The first one you can get is called Gathering Tempest. This is one where if you hold X, instead of just tapping it, you will deal fast strikes towards a single enemy, and I can show you that once I'm out of here. So that one is quite useful. The Vortex Dive is where you hold LB and then press X to dive forward while spinning your lightsaber. This one's great for closing the gap and, again, taking out multiple opponents at once. The Double Orbit is one where if you press Y again after the first time, it will make your lightsaber kind of do a big spinning attack around you, which is, again, useful for crowd control. Then we have Endless Hurricane, which is if you continue pressing X, you'll add additional attacks to the end of the double-bladed attack chain, so it makes your basic combo way more effective. We've then got Repulsing Burst, which is our jumping strong attack, which does area of effect damage. It's not my favorite as far as jumping strength attacks go in the game, but it can be useful and it is effective, especially against weaker enemies like stormtroopers and battle droids. Rising Storm, hold Y to perform an attack that pulls enemies in a small area and takes Cal into the air. This one's a force attack. It can be useful. I don't use it a ton, but it has its effects. Basically, it's really good at preventing enemies from completing their attacks, and sometimes you'll get some stagger out of it too. Then we have Multifold Reflections, so this one's pretty great if you're being shot at by a lot of laser blasts. The double-bladed lightsaber is really good at reflecting them, so if you hold the left bumper right before the blaster shots connect with you, it'll reflect all of them back towards nearby targets, so that's useful. Then we have Controlled Throw, so if you hold LB and Y to throw the lightsaber, keep Y held to maintain the lightsaber's position, and then you can use your joystick to direct it around. That's useful. It makes a very effective mid-range attack. So a lot of this stuff is very situational, but the double-bladed stance does have some of the most unique feeling stuff. So there's our Rising Vortex attack. If we're going to throw it, So you can see that we can actually control it out and use it for a little bit there. It's pretty useful stuff. The stance, like I said, is one of the more unique feeling ones, just based on the things that you can actually do with it. But anyway, so over-the-top, Sith, aggressive, unique stance is basically what we're going for. Now, mind you, every stance can be paired with another stance, and so not all of them are equal, and I recommend trying to pair complementary stances. So if you're making the Saber Staff your primary stance, your secondary ones are the ones that I find to be the most complementary for it, are either dual wielding or the crossguard stance. And so I currently have the crossguard stance equipped, as I find that the weaknesses of the Saber Staff are most accurately compensated for by the crossguard stance, and I also just really like the way that it plays out in the game, so that's why I chose it. But the dual wield stance also works really well. So we'll start with dual wield. As far as filling in the blanks, it's better against single opponents. So the Saber Staff is great against groups. Dual wielding is great against single opponents. It's one of the best dueling stances in the game. So if you have both of them, you can switch between them quickly. They're both very rapid, fast-paced, and fluid attack stances. And that gives you basically all the versatility you need. Saber Staff for use against larger groups or smaller enemies that you don't need to be super specialized in. And then you can switch over to dual wielding for your more complicated one-on-one dueling opponents. The transition, like I said, is very smooth because of how fast-paced both of the stances are. I find that it's super easy to quickly switch back and forth between them in combat without having to try and retrain your brain to look for openings very differently. And honestly, it's one of the best stance combos to use in combat in the entire game. So dual wielding and the Saber Staff go together really well. The other option, though, is the crossguard stance, which I have equipped, and I have it just because, like I said, I like the unique way that the crossguard stance works, and it also fills in for the weaknesses of the Saber Staff rather well. So you've got much heavier but much slower hits with this one. That being said, they deal the best single slash damage. So if you're switching over to dueling, especially against larger enemies with a lot more health and that aren't necessarily as fast, the crossguard stance works really well against them. And so pairing it with the Saber Staff works extremely well in my opinion. The reason that I like these two together is because they're pretty much solar opposites, which just really makes them very complementary. So like I said, either one of those works really well. I like them both a lot. They both work well. Both of those combinations work well for the dark side playstyle, in my opinion. So I don't really have one that I say is better than the other, but both of them are very good. As far as our perks go, the best ones that I find to go with the Saber Staff, these first three at least, go with the Saber Staff, then the last one has more to do with whether or not you choose the crossguard or the dual wield. But the first one is equilibrium. So this one says using force abilities increases the damage of the next lightsaber attack. This is one of my favorite skills because I like to use the force attacks a lot, and so I find myself using them quite a bit when I'm doing the Saber Staff stance, and so this one constantly means that I'm getting that damage boost, because every time you use a force attack, the next lightsaber attack you do will have increased damage. So equilibrium is definitely one that I recommend. The second one is shatter, and so it says attacks are more effective at breaking enemies' guards. This one I find to be very useful with the Saber Staff because you do a lot of attacks very quickly, but they don't have all that high of a stamina drain to them, and when you land them, they also don't do as much damage as a lot of the other stances. So if you have one that makes it much easier to break through your enemy's guard much quicker, which Shatter does, I find that to be very, very useful with the Saber Staff. So I definitely recommend Shatter to go with the double-bladed stance. Then in the same type of thing, Dexterity, more than any other stance with the double-bladed saber, I find myself throwing it a lot in combat. Even at close range, it's very, very effective, and so Dexterity just makes it so your lightsaber throws deal a lot more damage. Because of how much versatility the Saber Staff has being thrown, I think Dexterity is a no-brainer, and you really have to use it for this build. Finally, the last one is one of two skills. Since I have the crossguard equipped, I have Recuperation, and the reason for that is because this one just gives you that additional minimum force regen, so your force is going to regenerate quicker, and because I use the force abilities a lot when I'm fighting, I think Recuperation works well for that. And the reason I like this one is because the other option is Versatility, which works really, really well and does a lot of effect if you switch back and forth between forms a lot. So if you're using the double-bladed stance with the dual-wielding stance, and like I said, when I do that, I switch back and forth very frequently in combat, then Versatility is better because it gives you a damage boost, which is temporary, but it's every single time time you switch stances. So if you're switching stances a lot, versatility is the best. It's better than recuperation for this 4th slot here. But if you're not, then recuperation makes a lot more sense because it just gives you that additional force regen and is going to allow you to do a lot more force attacks, which stacks with the equilibrium because every force attack you do is going to make your next lightsaber attack that much more effective. So those are the perks that I like to go with for my double-bladed Sith build. And that's really all there is to say about the double-bladed stance in Star Wars Jedi Survivor. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it to be useful or at least entertaining, but that is all for today, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching another Dare to Game video. If you liked this video, please leave a like and a comment. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. If you like my content and would like to support this channel, consider becoming a member today for as little as $1.99 a month. It makes a huge difference. But in any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day. I'll see you next time.